Viewers, welcome to the talk show Promising Bangladesh, sponsored by Crown Cement. And this is Sinha M.A. Sayeed anchoring this very talk show. Viewers, everybody knows very well that many things are taking place in Bangladesh at this very moment. And having this very perspective in mind, we have invited Mr. Shahiduzzaman, former professor of Dhaka University, and he is an authority on international relations and global politics. Well, Mr. Shahiduzzaman, how are you?
I'm fine, sir.
It is known to all what is happening in Bangladesh at this very moment, especially departure of Prime Minister after submitting resignation to the President, and the subsequent consequences is still going on. What are your focuses on the whole thing?
Thank you. This is an extraordinary phenomena, and amazingly, the whole world, the major powers are, following the developments in Bangladesh. What has thrilled the Western world beyond belief, in utter disbelief, in fact, is the reality that it's been projected that the entire upsurge was led by the students, younger generation. This is something rare in global politics, where a revolutionary change almost, where the government is overthrown at a lightning speed through such a amazing commitment by university and college students, and who are later on joined by the general population. The entire moral basis, the moral fabric of this entire event was so powerful that even countries in Europe, their television channels, and in addition to the Al Jazeera channel, were continuously monitoring the developments, and we were at the top of world news for almost 2 days. And what has added a great deal of sophistication to this entire process was the brilliant manner in which many of the female students of different universities, their facial expression, their command over the English language, their degree of concern about the country, the amazing power of their patriotic fervor, they were expressed, especially in the German television. I had noted that the lady who was serving as the anchor looked with amazing bewilderment as a young girl kept on narrating in correct English the way she felt. All the expressions that emerged for the rest of the world came spontaneously. They emerged in such a sense of concern that even perhaps the Indian media was overtaken. What was a very challenging reality in terms of media expression was the question of Indian projection of these realities. For a few days when this occurred, the Indians were taken by total surprise. They had totally underestimated the magnitude of the movement, the speed with which the student community would be able to generate overall public support. This had turned the Indians into a totally into a shocking condition. They responded with amazing degree of deception, a conscious deception by the Indian media, trying to project the younger generation as some elements who had fallen away from the mainstream, elements who had certain problems with their academic experiences, who were confronted with rising unemployment and wanted the ending of the quota. The Indians really wanted to make this look as a simple problem of the younger generation related to their career future. But when they saw that the entire nation had joined together with the students and the whole thing turned into a movement, it came as a totally defensive response now from the Indians. Thank God, I'm so happy that the United States was able to treat these developments with a certain sense of earlier knowledge. They had completely understood the nature of the problems of deception by the ruling class. And the United States ambassador, who had left recently, had expressed his utter dismay that he couldn't see a transition to democracy the way the United States had wanted. So I believe that the United States had specially prepared itself to look at the whole resistance that emerged from the younger generation with a great deal of sympathy and support, and all the arguments that were placed by the ruling regime in Bangladesh, trying to make it look like Islamic terrorist upsurge, a typical ploy where I think the neighboring country, the Indians, had a big role. That didn't work out. Continuously the minority population here, the powerful figures in the media in Dhaka, and then of course the Awami League government itself wanted to project the whole thing as an effort by the leading opposition party, BNP, and the Jamaat, that as if it was a conspiracy to bring in militant Islam, it was a conspiracy to take over the movement, and it appeared that they really tried to play their same old game, and they had completely misunderstood the possibility of the Western response. We know that over the last few months, since this the Awami League government usurped power again, the Western countries had consistently refused to acknowledge the legal validity of this government. In fact, I myself had always continued to believe and had projected this regime as a pure terrorist regime. I had been writing in the social media for almost a year now, and I had gone on taking a great risk to use the term not government but a terrorist regime. I had always pointed out that since I had been teaching international security at the university for almost like 40 years, and my background and training had all been involved with understanding the definitional aspects of concepts of security, terms like insurgency, terrorism, and similar movements that affect the legitimacy of a government, I could clearly foresee from my own academic training that this fits in, this regime that had existed for all these years, ideally fits in with the perception of a terrorist regime, that it was in this country, it was a legitimacy crisis, and the question of legitimacy was being defined in my subject. Experts like Brian Jenkins, Peter O'Neill, there are great writers in international security who have treated the question of legitimacy in terms of the ethical, moral perception, the question of whether what is good and what is bad in terms of value judgment. Now, when I had applied these ethical bases, the moral basis, and the question of values, it was absolutely clear that this regime had consistently refused to respect the norms of democracy. This regime had consistently been creating lies, deceptive methods, applying all sorts of means to cripple the judiciary, to cripple the military institution, to enslave the bureaucracy and the police, all of it consistently fitted with the definition of a terrorist regime. But to my utter disappointment, whenever I would come to talk shows and use the term that terrorist Awami League, this is a terrorist regime, I wouldn't see much response or reaction. Even the leading opposition parties hardly ever used the term terrorist for this regime. They always used to call it an illegal government, illegal system, which sort of gave legitimacy to a terrorist organization. But when we had experienced what had happened in the last 1 week or so, we have seen a naked display of methods that cannot be underestimated in terms of its terrorist content. It was absolutely clear to the world, and especially to the United States and UK, that this lady, who had been a pathological liar for the last 15 years or so, had simply she brooked no consideration for any ethical values, and had always been using opportunist language whenever it would be convenient for her. And the way the people had suffered, the way the opposition parties had paid the price, it's absolutely unprecedented. I would say that in the 21st century, if you look at dictatorial regimes, fascist regimes, none would match the type of brutalization of the younger generation. And that is why I think that the whole world was taken by a surprise. They just simply looked at the younger people, younger folks from the university, with utter disbelief that how could the younger generation develop the confidence of so much authority over the state structure? How could younger generation girls who were simply undergraduates at the university talk so confidently that they would decide the future structure of the government, they would sit in the decision-making bodies where the interim government is created, and they would decide who would run the interim government? Can you imagine this happening in any other country? In my last 40 years of dealing with international relations, I have not seen a single country where the younger generation had the confidence to monopolize the perception of future priorities for a government. So this is absolutely outstanding. This particular reality had totally, surprised the Indian government. And
I will come to you after a break. Viewers, we are going for a short break. Please keep watching. We are back to the talk show Promise Bangladesh, sponsored by Crown Cement, and we are having talks with Professor Shahiduzzaman, an authority on international politics, relations and diplomacy. Mr. Shahiduzzaman, you are talking about the fall of Sheikh Hasina. Now the question is, what is going on in Bangladesh at this very moment? And the post scenario may be something moving towards negative direction or positive direction. What are your understanding?
Thank you. Now I turn to the reality, the way, the sober realization of what the future that we confront. I had just in the last few minutes I was just talking about the extraordinary nature of the developments based on the younger generation and how the whole rest of the world looked at it. Now when we turn to the impending future, you have to see that we have undergone almost 15 years of what we called habitual obedience in political science language. The whole entire machinery in the country was geared to the perceptions of a single person, and we were taught the way that the country's priorities, the country's future had to be geared to the needs and personal values of this regime, and specifically the person. Now the challenge right now for the future is, how do we get off from the stereotyping, the fixed beliefs that had emerged over the last 15 years, and they had caused the people, the ruling elite, all of them to be habituated to a way of thinking which is, more than anything else focused in terms of foreign policy first, being Indo-centric, being anti, Muslim world, specifically being anti-Pakistani, that everything with Pakistan, the word Pakistan is absolutely unacceptable, it denotes submission. The way this government operated was that for the last almost 15 years, they consistently attacked the political culture that had emerged in our country over a practice of hundreds of years. If I may just elaborate that, we are a population which acquired political consciousness right from our identity as Bengali Muslims. The concentration of Muslims in this part of the subcontinent and their evolution into their political consciousness that developed to the level of, acquiring a political entity, it all started from the beginning of the Muslim rule in this part. That is, if I may specify, the Ikhtiaruddin Muhammad Bakhtiyar Khilji's, his invasion of Bengal, and then the beginning of the Muslim rule. For hundreds of years, over the last 500 or so years, we in this part of the subcontinent, the Muslims, had struggled to preserve our identity, our culture. We were confronted by the tremendous attack of casteism, the Hinduist perception of what ought to be the moral basis of religion. And somehow our evolution as a state, first as when Sarwardi tried to create a united Bengal, he knew of the difficulties. He tried to create a secular united Bengal with Assam. Who dismissed it? It was the Hindus in Kolkata, the Hindus who supported Congress. They stabbed Sarwardi on the back in the Bengal Constituent Assembly in 1946. And so we were left with no other option but to pick up the shreds of territory that would constitute East Pakistan. We were cheated so badly. It is said that if Sarwardi had...
My asking to you, what is about the present situation?
Okay, I was just coming to it, When we emerged as a nation state in 1970, first in 1947, where our leaders took the leadership, played the leadership role to create Pakistan. And then in 1971, we continued with the same identity. The Muslims of Bengal, who maintained the same boundaries and were therefore in geopolitical terms, were enshrined with the same values of distinctiveness. Now, coming to your point now, for 15 years, the rulers here tried to secede from the values that we had inculcated for centuries. They tried to build this secular idea which made no sense, which in fact was a excuse to cancel out the partition in 1947, the validity of our separate entity, and this particular regime did everything in a planned way to turn to carry us towards the idea of Akhand Bharat. Now, this perception reached such a point with changes in textbooks, with the total challenge to religious values by terming a major political party as enemies of independence. All of it were imposed as stereotypes. Now, when we emerge today, suddenly we see that we have to create our original basic realities, which would disassociate us with the Indian perception that was pursued in the last 15 years to impose their own ideas of secularist, pretensions, if I may say so, and Indian policy to eventually turn this land into some sort of a vassal state. By the grace of Almighty, we were able to save ourselves. We were almost reaching the verge when the last terrorist regime leader was trying to sort of commit this country towards almost a total penetration by India into our territory, building connectivity, introducing values, forcing us to have a more beyond proportion domination in the job sector by people who suited their needs. All of it was leading this country towards a permanent loss of sovereign status. In fact, we were all talking that I think that we are finished, we've lost our sovereignty. And it seemed that even the military as an instrument seemed removed from the people, and we were utterly disappointed. And then suddenly we see this God-given destiny. Now, today, we are faced with the reality of remaking our identity, rediscovering what we were 15 years back. Because that is the perception, those are the values of the more than majority of the people. If you have seen the thrust of the younger generation over the last few days, there was such compelling commitment to refix our identity as a Muslim country with Islamic values. And thank God that the decisions that were taken in the last 2 days have returned the Islamic content of our politics in the mainstream of our politics. This is something which is a challenge, because when we think of our future, there is simply no way that we can trust India in terms of a genuine friendship. This government had tried its best, it simply gave away the trump card which we had in the Northeast. It simply, opened up all opportunities for entrance by the Indian investors, and it seemed that in near future, the Indians, once they would build connectivity, they would argue that they would like to have some military presence, and that would have turned us into some sort of a Sikkim status. Now, we have this tremendous, although this is a caretaker government and it may be just destined to survive for 3 months, as it says. I suspect that if Dr. Yunus has his way, and if his talents and if his brilliance are allowed to play a role, he should be able to carry out certain very basic reforms. The real challenge that we face today is the question of restructuring the constitution. I would have much preferred to see that the present constitution, which had been absolutely, distorted beyond recognition, this constitution should be annulled. But it seems that right now, the question of annulment has been put on the back burner. Perhaps that seemed realistic, but I think it's quite possible that Professor Yunus would be guided by more interested legal brains. I can foresee a very powerful, very well trained legal mind here, not the ones that we are familiar with, but a justice who keeps a low profile in the Supreme Court. I would like to name Justice Rafayat Ahmed, who has a PhD from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy and has his undergraduate education from Oxford. He matches in terms of quality the Chief Justices of India and Pakistan, and he has considerable education in terms of how to carry out the legal process of targeting a previous regime which had completely destroyed the very basis of the common sense direction of the constitution. The real challenge would be for the upcoming regime not just to prepare for an election 3 months ahead, because that would be simply a superficial exercise. If the leading political parties believe that the role of this caretaker government, interim government, is simply to exercise the elections, that would be a disaster, because a lot of damage has been done to the constitution. Of course, elected people should change the constitution, but the thing is, we have to perceive that there are legal experts who can give the constitution a human face. And then of course, there is the younger generation who I am sure will put tremendous pressure to validate a more balanced constitution. Now, going back to the question of our relationship, our perception of foreign policy, I can see a near future where there would be a tremendous resurgence of values. You know, the one thing that we lost in the last 15 years is the importance of values. Without values, there is no legitimacy for a government. And this was why the earlier regime was a terrorist regime, because it completely departed from the values that make up the character of morality, of what is right and wrong for a government. Now, what I expect is that you can see the trends in the last 24 hours. The younger generation have displayed a tremendous ethical basis, cleaning up the parliament roads, cleaning up the Ganobhavan, returning the stolen items. These are small steps, but they indicate our new generation's commitment to the values of morality. Now, this is where Dr. Yunus has to really play his cards very well. I would personally would have preferred that we should have waited until he returned, and we should have let him make his own team of advisors. Instead of, you know, planting, you know, you are getting students, you are getting the military, you are getting the political leaders, all of them have vested interests and they would like to see their own choice as advisors. And that is why I think we still do not have any announcement. But I would hope that Dr. Yunus would have a great deal of control in terms of companionship, you know, getting along with this group. He has a huge task in terms of economic recovery. I hope that, you know, while India has been projecting this interim government in a very negative sense, our effort should be, and in fact the effort of the government should be to distance ourselves as much as possible from Indian, you know, treaties, agreements which were signed illegally by the past regime. As you know, even security deals were signed with absolutely no concern or no discussion or no knowledge of the people, of the experts, not to speak of a illegal parliament. Even if that would have been there to discuss the question of national security and, you know, connectivity deals with India, it would make sense. The first thing in terms of foreign policy option would be how effectively we distance ourselves from Indian penetration, how effectively we can remove ourselves with all sorts of impositions. You know, for example, I can cite you the deal on that coal plant in the southwest, something called Rampal. You know, examples like that and many other structures. These should be revised, and perhaps the most important compelling reality is for us to renew immediately the Tista project with China, which was, I think, the greatest damage that the last regime had done.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shahiduzzaman. We will go for a short break. Okay. Viewers, we are going for a short break. Please keep watching. Viewers, we are back to the talk show. Promising Bangladesh is sponsored by Crown Cement. And this is Sinha Sayeed sponsoring this talk show. Viewers, we are having talks with Professor Shahiduzzaman, a very profound teacher of international politics and relations, Dhaka University. And he passed more than 40 years at the University of Dhaka. And now he is almost a veteran authority on global politics. Well, Mr. Shahiduzzaman, we know very well the presidential election in America has drawn attention globally, because America means the global power and global leadership. Ms. Kamala Harris, now the running presidential nominee of Democratic Party, and Mr. Trump. And Trump, to some extent, is very arrogant. And he passed so many comments about Kamala Harris, undermined her. But the history repeats itself, and it is going to be a new phenomenon in American politics, that Kamala Harris is not a mere presidential nominee. She is something more. What is your study?
Well, this is an exciting reality again in the United States, where we see the United States as very important to our future. It's obviously very important to see who emerges as the next American president. To me, I've been following the developments in the United States. Even when President Trump, former President Trump, was almost being assassinated, the entire American nation seemed to have showered their sympathy to President Trump, and it seemed almost certain that he would emerge as the next president, since President Biden was too weak. He had let down the hopes of the Democratic Party. But then everything changed when President Biden stepped down and Kamala Harris emerged as the replacement. It was amazing how quickly she captured the interest. The timing was absolutely profound. Kamala Harris got the nomination of the Democratic Party in a matter of days, and her very candidature led the Democrats to raise funds beyond imagination. I've been told that the Democrats have raised as much as $300 million in the last several weeks, and Kamala Harris has just picked up her vice presidential choice, the governor of Minnesota, who is an extremely sound liberal. As you know, Minnesota represents the heart of American liberalism, is the heart of the Democratic Party's, political, cultural growth. She has a husband who, although he is Jewish, has been an extremely liberal, accommodating Jew who wants that the Palestinians should have a separate state, who would like to support the American Jewry, which is more liberal and more accommodating to Muslims. That means she is just opposite to Trump. But these are the exceptional things which make, Kamala Harris potentially very powerful. She is going to face the nomination of the Democratic Convention, which is just coming in a matter of week or so, and I can foresee that there will be overwhelming support from the Democratic delegates for her candidature. The election effort has gained tremendous momentum, so much so that President Trump is confused. He doesn't even want to face her in a debate. You remember the first debate when President Trump almost slaughtered poor Biden, and Biden was unprepared. It completely destroyed Biden's prospects. But Kamala Harris would definitely make up for what went wrong in the first debate. So much so, and she is just maintaining her cool, because she is not going to take all those, idiotic rhetorics that Trump uses, all sorts of, derogatory expressions, slangs, trying to, even mispronounce her name, making mockery out of her, black identity, and trying to really hit her below the belt. Kamala Harris is going to take him on issues, and no one other than Kamala knows the president's, indictments, a criminal who was supposed to be in the jail. Trump is very vulnerable, and his womanizing verdicts, which would lead Kamala Harris to prosecute, him right on the podium and dismiss him away. So I personally believe that the second debate will be crucial. It will simply, be disastrous unless Trump can educate himself with legal norms. But for Bangladesh and for India, I would expect that if she would be the first, woman president of the United States, if she is elected, she has tremendous degree of support, not just among American women, irrespective of blacks and whites. Even the white men, those who have been looking for another option, because they simply cannot see it ethically right to vote for a man who has been charged to be in the jail as a criminal. Those people are now turning around and saying that, hey, this lady makes sense. I mean, if she can thrill the American men, it is quite possible that, what we see today as a razor-sharp, neck-to-neck contest may just tilt slightly in favor of Kamala. So what I'm trying to say is that it's going to be a close race, because Trump simply would refuse to accept a defeat. That happened earlier. And Kamala Harris is the only person, I think, in America, in spite of her black status, she has the skills to defeat Trump. So the next few months are going to be very exciting. It would be educative for us. You know, in Bangladesh, we had suffered so much on the question of accountability, a proper parliament, an election process. I just pray to Almighty that we learn from the American elections, because we have to create a balanced system where you will have an executive authority where, you know, the Prime Minister does not have to be any celebrity. I find it disgusting that we use these terms that had been used to create idols, to create gods out of human beings. I would not name the title that the Awami League uses for its perception of the Godfather, but such perceptions of Godfather is dangerous, is outright insult to the common sense of a citizen. If we look at the Western world, even if we look at many of the democracies in the third world countries, in Southeast Asia, you know, you have Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, which were former dictatorships, fascist, almost fascist, and they have now turned into healthy democracies. Look at Sri Lanka, how beautifully they have had their elections. Even the Indians, you know, the Modi was slapped in the last election, and all his dreams of this fundamentalist Hindutva seem to have been, you know, penetrated by the opposition parties. We should be having the type of government, the type of elections where we don't need any charismatic figures. You know, look at the way the Labour Party came to power after such long period of conservative rule. Nobody could imagine that Rishi Sunak would be wiped away so soon, when he was in fact trying to rise. Suddenly there was this Israeli invasion in Gaza. Suddenly Rishi Sunak took the traditional hardline approach of supporting Israel, and then suddenly he lost his moral credibility to the British people, because as much as they would vote for Israel, they know in their hearts that Rishi Sunak was morally corrupt when he sided with Israel on the question of the Palestine. It was just immediately after that that the conservative government collapsed in Britain, and now you see, you know, it's very normal emergence of the opposition leader. That's the type of democracy we can have. Matter of fact approach, no superlatives, no, you know, trying to create sensation. Our issues are too serious. Now we have a vibrant young generation which wouldn't give up. But the most important thing that we realize, we should remember, is that we need to correct our relationship with our former, you know, partner Pakistan. Over the last 15 years, Pakistan has been bedeviled. The Indians have tried to isolate us from Pakistan, and we hardly have any relationship. And yet from a security and strategic perspective, you know, Pakistan is perhaps the most important potential ally, because now that you have understood Indian intentions, there, you know, Jaishankar had remarked just 2 months back to a Western journalist that it was a great mistake to create Bangladesh, because Bangladesh is a threat to the security of Northeast. I couldn't believe my ears. I heard it. If you check up the records, you know, it was hardly, how the hell would an Indian foreign minister in power who had such pretensions of love for Bangladeshi Prime Minister make such a statement to a Western journalist that the creation of Bangladesh is a threat to Indian security? What would you think? It implies that Indians government, especially the Modi Jaishankar government, would give up no chance to not to annex Bangladesh, but to turn us literally into a vassal state. This is where we need Pakistan. Pakistan is the only other country which has the nuclear weapons, which has the military preparation. You know, I hate to say this, but over the last several years, this Hasina regime had deliberately destroyed the morale of the military. When I see our generals, when I see our soldiers, they don't look as professional as they used to be. It was said earlier, you know, that in the borders, our BDR used to boast that one BDR can take care of 4 BSF Jawans. That was the pride we used to have in earlier years, that our professional competence was so good. But Hasina and the past regime has turned us into helpless victims of, BSF shootings. They treat us with such low esteem, and that is where we see the relevance of Pakistan and China. I would like to see that we develop a nuclear partnership with Pakistan in the future. I would like to see that this government will sow the seeds. I am sure Dr. Yunus would do that, of normal relations with Pakistan. And I would expect that we have joint military security exercises with Pakistan. The more we do so, the more India will respect us. And the more you will see these conspirators in the country who wish to, totally demolish our faith as Muslims. Our Muslim is brotherhood with our Pakistani normal brother. It's a beautiful country. The frontier, we should have direct flights, we should have visa-free exchange, we should re-establish brotherly ties with Pakistan. They are not our enemies, they don't threaten us. The only thing they can do to us is help us to counter Indian ambitions.
Thank you very much.
And that is where I think we should focus in the next few months.
Thank you very much, Professor Shahiduzzaman. You spoke very well in the whole talk show, and you spoke alone. I did not interfere anything. And thank you very much. Viewers, we are about to end this talk show, and before ending this talk show, I have to summarize what Professor Shahiduzzaman uttered, commented, explained, and narrated. The main thesis he propounded is the fall of Sheikh Hasina is one chapter. And the next chapter is to rebuild the state, rebuild the constitution, and inspire the people to do something in line of real politics in Bangladesh. He is to some extent frustrated at the ongoing political scenario in Bangladesh, and as a professor, Department of International Relations of Dhaka University, he aspires relations with Pakistan is also relevant in the context of geopolitics. And he also believes relation between Bangladesh and the Western world, especially America, is a call of time in a very positive mood and mode. And he believes also that China is a very good ally, and the geopolitics in the subcontinent, centering Indo-centric geopolitics, which was the main concern and deed of immediate past government led by Sheikh Hasina, should be revisited, re-explained in overall scenario. And he also believes what is happening in Bangladesh very moment, and the army-backed government at this very moment should have all these things not in the same box. So many boxes are there, and it is up to the Nobel laureate, Dr. Yunus, who can, he believes, make a breakthrough in the history of Bangladesh as a man of promise, as a man of dedication, as a man of something which is not known to us. And let us pray to Almighty Allah so that Bangladesh can overcome this political land disputes in Bangladesh and move towards a very positive, promising Bangladesh. And thank you very much. We'll meet you in the next talk show. Thank you.